Expert witnesses. Let's talk about expert witnesses. Expert witnesses, the rule is 702 in the Federal Rules of Evidence. Now, I'm talking about the Federal Rules of Evidence because most states will base theirs on the Federal Rules of Evidence, at least loosely. But you don't have to memorize the rules as long as you use a little bit of common sense. Now, if you don't have common sense, memorize the rule. But the number one thing that you have to know about using an expert witness is that their testimony will not be allowed if their testimony would not be helpful to the judge or to the jury in understanding something or some concept, some fact. So it's if they're helpful, then you can call them as a witness. But then you have to ask yourself, well, what makes them helpful? What is it that gives them their expertedness? What makes them an expert? And you could even ask the question just like that. Well, what makes you the expert? And have them talk about their training, their experience, their knowledge, education. So all of those things that may make them an expert. What projects have they worked on? Are they published? Have they done any studies? Were those studies peer reviewed? Have they authored a book? So when you start talking about what makes them an expert and you have them go through what makes them an expert, then you have to go back and say, okay, so we know that their testimony would be helpful. This is what makes them the expert. Do they have an opinion on the topic? And if they do, then it's, well, how did they form that opinion? Because you don't just get to say, well, hey, are you an expert? Yes, I am. What makes you an expert? Because of my experience. And do you have an opinion? Yeah, I do. Well, what is it? And then they give it. So you have to have a basis, or they have to have a basis for that opinion. It's not just an opinion. It's based on something concrete. Usually, if we're talking about scientific evidence, it's based on some accepted scientific criteria. Something like, if we're talking about alcohol, something like the Widmark formula. It is accepted through the scientific community regardless of which side of the platform you fall on. And it's based on studies. And so an expert could do the Widmark formula and say, I believe their blood alcohol was this based on this scientific formula that is accepted. Now, it's not always that clear cut though, because it doesn't have to be based on some scientific evidence. You can sometimes base it on your experience. If I'm a pig farmer and I've been a pig farmer for 40 years, then I can testify about pig anatomy because I'm a pig farmer. I've butchered lots of pigs. I've worked with pigs most of my life, and I know a lot about them, but I've never read a scientific study. But I can tell you the average weight, height, size, growth rates. I can talk a lot about it because I have experience. So remember, it's not always about the education training. It's what makes them an expert. Is it helpful? Do you have an opinion? And then what is the basis of that opinion? And as long as you go through all of those steps, and as long as you just think about it logically and get those questions answered, then follow up with, Judge, I'd like to tender them as an expert. Judge will say, okay, is there any objection? And if you've done it right, there shouldn't be much objection if you've got a real expert on your hands. And the judge will say they're an expert. Then you ask them what that expert opinion is, and you go through it for the jury. That is the very basics of an expert. And the federal rules will follow that, but it's really just common sense. Good luck.